Good day, everybody. Welcome to the second session of the Elemental Expo District Energy Series. This series is brought to you by Buro Happold, an independent multidisciplinary engineering consultancy, and Danfoss, a leading manufacturer and supplier of equipment and innovator in the district energy space. My name is Justin Etherington. I'm Associate Director in the Energy team in London, Buro Happold, and we offer bespoke independent energy consultancy across regulatory compliance, strategy development, and industry research. And we go across all scales, from single buildings all the way up to district and new city, as well as local area energy planning. We believe that decentralized energy is really a key component, one of the strands that will deliver climate change mitigation and must deliver on that. It's a very interesting time in the district energy world at the moment, with lots of change happening internally and externally. And through this series, this series of 4 webinars, we're discussing key topics, including the state of the market, trends and technologies, today's session, which is about regulatory framework for district heating, another topic on another session on financing of heat network, and also finally, what does the future hold for district energy in the UK? I mean, the future seems more uncertain now than ever, and we're all in this situation, but there is great momentum growing in recognition of the need to transition away from fossil fuels, and the energy sector is right at the heart of this. So there's widespread action to achieve net zero, and there's a big question: how can district energy play into this? Many of the modelled scenarios suggest an enormous increase in district energy deployment, up to the from the 2%, around 2% of the UK market we have today, up to the 20%, and further in some cases. But the question is, how do we achieve this? And to achieve it, district energy must be valuable. It must prove its value against other solutions, and it must offer reliable, affordable, flexible, and most of all, clean heat. And that all against the backdrop of other technologies, and also in a time frame that's quite fast. So today we're going to discuss how regulatory frameworks can support this journey and support the transition for district energy. And to discuss it here with me today, I've got 3 wonderful panelists, Soulla, James and Caroline. And if you'd like to introduce yourselves, then we'll get on to the conversation. Soulla.
Hi, yeah, my name's Soulla Paphitis. I'm a business development manager for Danfoss in the UK, and I predominantly work in heat networks, so district heating and also district cooling.
Thank you. James?
Yeah, my name is James Dickinson. I'm a Discipline Director for Energy for Buro Happold. I've got around 15 years experience in energy and sustainable energy systems, and we're sort of leading design for quite a few innovative projects across the UK at the moment, both in England and Scotland, yeah, at various different sizes and scales.
Thank you. And Caroline?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caroline Bragg. I'm the Head of Policy at the Association for Decentralised Energy, which is a trade association representing, among other sectors, the heat network sector.
Thank you. In terms of regulation, it's been it's quite a journey for district energy, really starting from no regulation, beginning a sort of curve towards regulation with the metering and billing regulation in 2014, the establishment of the Heat Trust that you're probably familiar with, and then the Competition Markets Authority review in 2017, concluding in 2018, really pointing towards there being need for action. And we're coming to a time now where there is a more formal proposal for action. I suppose I'd like to start with the question: what's the need for regulation, so we can understand the basis for it? Who would like to take that one?
I can start first. I think the first thing to say, exactly as you mentioned, with the CMA study, it found that the consumer outcomes for people on heat networks versus the regulated sector are broadly comparable at the minute. And so I think it's clear that we do not need regulation right now to address existing poor customer outcomes. I think for us, the real need for regulation is that there is a really bright future for an enormous thriving industry for heat networks networks in the UK going forward. But if we're going to make up 20% of heating demand, including very significant domestic heating demand, I think it's important in that world, in that industry, that particularly around customer protection, some of those outcomes are regulated. That helps us and the industry in terms of it reduces the risk, it supports a mature industry that's set on a par with the gas and electricity regulated sectors. And obviously as well, it ensures that we are delivering excellent customer outcomes going forward.
Yeah, I think there's some really good points, Caroline. I mean, and certainly customer protection as at the forefront of this, I think, and also to give our clients, the sort of local authorities are inevitably leading a lot of the newer big schemes across the UK, and from a consultant's perspective and a designer's perspective, having some consistency in terms of design and how schemes are going to be run from an operational and maintenance perspective is so important, because we see a lot of variability, even with CP1 coming out, a new version of that coming out very shortly. It still leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation about what's required, what kind of carbon standards are in place, and how a system gets kind of optimized, not only in its first instance, but, throughout its whole lifetime, 20, 30, 40 years. So I think it's well due in the industry now, and a lot of learning has happened in the last 20, 30 years in terms of district heating. And we don't necessarily just need to mimic what's been done in Scandinavia. We need to do something that's very bespoke for the UK and sort of mirrors certain aspects, but really needs to really reflect where we are at the moment in the UK and what we want to achieve in district energy.
Yeah, I think that's great. Some great points that you raised there, James, that we don't have to copy what's happened in Scandinavia or Europe, but we should take some of their best practices, I believe, take the things that they've done particularly well and mold them so that they fit with where we are in the UK. I mean, Danfoss is a multinational company, and I speak to people from across Europe on a daily basis, and not necessarily what works in Germany or what works in Slovenia or anywhere else will necessarily work in the UK. We are a very different kettle of fish, for want of a better analogy. We are unique, we are different. The way we design our systems is different. Some of the regulations that we follow, for as far as like Legionnaires in the system and things like that go, in Scandinavia, they don't necessarily follow the same temperature profiles that we do. Therefore, we will need to adapt and learn from what they are doing and find ways of incorporating that into the UK. Temperatures and things like that will play a huge part, and I think regulating what minimum temperatures can be run at will certainly help towards a greener and cleaner system. So I think there are lots of reasons to regulate district heating networks, and lots of things in order to support, especially where it comes to the design and the product that goes in. There is, like you said, with CP1, it's still so very unclear as to what they should be using or what products should be used and in how they should be applied. So, for me, regulation should be a clear description of what is required and how we can go about doing that as a collective. It's not just about one person or one part of the industry, it's about a collective collaboration of everybody together.
And that's really interesting, because I think there's two themes coming out of that. One is certainly recognized about the requirement framework to give consumer protection, and that side of it. There was also a strong call there regarding the technical requirement, which is sort of both ends of the system, if you like. You can't have one without the other, but it's interesting to hear that both sides feel that we need to have some sort of authority above that. Would that do you think that should be represented also in some stronger regulation about pricing? Because the current approach, as I understand it, is more to expose transparency and make sure there's clear transparency in price build-up. Do you think there could be does anyone think there could be a place for stronger pricing? So I know that in the Netherlands they have sort of maximum heat pricing.
I mean, I think I would say to that, I think the CMA, that was one of the questions that the CMA specifically addressed, right? I think perhaps there was a concern before that market study that prices were excessive in some parts of the market. And I think what the CMA study concluded really quite conclusively is that that's not the case. There may be, there is a range certainly of pricing within the heat networks market, but it's not that pricing is excessive. I think also when we look at, if you look at broader trends within the energy sector, price caps where they've been used for the electricity and gas sectors are a symptom of, you could argue they are a symptom of broader problems in that market, right? And it's not that it is certainly not the case either that is an easy option, either for Ofgem, certainly not for the suppliers. So I think we don't see any reason why there should be the introduction of a price cap at the moment.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I mean, we battle with the economics of new district heating schemes all the time, and it's really hard to kind of imagine a scenario where you set limits on a system where the context might actually suit a slightly higher heat price because the counterfactual is so high anyway. So how you'd sort of normalize that across the industry in different contexts for different consumers, it becomes hugely complex. I mean, what I would say is very much alluding to your point, Justin, about having some transparency there, that is absolutely essential in making sure people understand what exposure they've got to increases in heat prices in the future and how they're index linked. And, being sort of doing a lot of techno-economic modeling ourselves, we realize that, that's so sensitive. Most models are very sensitive to the OPEX, so the operational costs and the revenue to support that long-term investment. And it's not always the capital cost that really stops these schemes going ahead. So you need to sort of look at each one in isolation and just apply the right principles to suit the procurement model, the commercial model that you want to progress with.
Yeah, I mean, transparency definitely is required. I agree with Caroline. I don't think you can start putting caps on pricing and things like that. It then becomes way too complicated, and it's the image that heat networks have already got. And we don't want to complex that further by adding price caps and things like that. So having some form of transparency so people are fully aware and fully understand what the charges are, what the operational costs are, and so on and so forth, I think is far more beneficial than saying this is your price cap. Nobody likes to be told this is what you will pay. Let's be honest, but having some guidance would be great, but transparency for me is far better.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen where it's been trialled elsewhere in other utilities is that it leads to everybody heading towards that cap rather than just setting the pricing as appropriate for the project.
Of course, why charge less when you can charge more? If you've been given a cap figure to get to, why not do that? So yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I don't necessarily see that. From my perspective, where I come from, I don't necessarily see that the pricing is the the stopper for anything at the moment. There are difference in operational costs from different types of technologies and different types of solutions, and as you said, James, not necessarily is it the capex cost, but the opex cost that is the reason why these projects don't always go ahead. And it is the type of technology which is the reason why those operational costs are far more. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter of people understanding and knowledge, and sharing experience is where we need to get to with things like this. Regulation is not always the easiest thing to follow, and if we can simplify it to a point where people understand it and there's transparency with it, I think you get far more buy-in from that.
Turning it around a little bit on that, because I think that's absolutely right as well. But turning it around a little bit, what about a minimum standard on technical efficiency of a system? And how do we not penalise people that are stuck on a network that isn't performing to an efficiency, and therefore they have the transparency, but they're on the sharp end of high losses and poor performance, and pay for that?
Yeah.
How could is there something there that regulation could do to support that, and how might that work?
So yeah, I mean, there are many poor performing systems around, and I do honestly feel that there should be something in place in order to regulate those myself. I think it's important that current systems are brought into a certain level where they're operating properly and efficiently. I don't necessarily believe that that's down to the consumer, that they should take a brunt of the costs to rectify these situations, but I do feel that there should be some guidance and regulation for operators, utility companies, in order to make sure that their networks are up to a good level. And I think by doing that and ensuring that the buildings that they've already got on there are running efficiently and that the system is running correctly, it then opens up to extending these networks, to adding more consumers onto these networks, and by actually starting to build these grids of district heating and cooling across the country. And then by that point, we're at a position where we're actually starting to copy, or not copy, but starting to find, you know, our way and starting to increase those percentages of district heating. I mean, we're at 2-3% at the moment. I think by 2050, we've said 18 to 20%. You know, if we don't start correcting the networks that we've got and regulating and bringing them up to a standard in order to increase the ability to add other connections to that, then, you know, the cost of starting from scratch is far greater than connecting a building to an existing network.
Yeah.
Caroline,
I think we can get a bit sort of, I mean, you know, with the CMA study, they found that on average, heat network customers pay about £100 less than those who are in the regulated market. So I think it's important to bear in mind that the vast majority of heat network customers currently are on at least comparable, if not lower, bills than the rest of the industry. And I think particularly, exactly as you were saying, Soulla, like there are a small number of poorly performing heat networks that we do need to mitigate. But really the prize here and the kind of real area of focus, I think, should be on getting a balance of incentives and regulation right. That means that we can expand this industry. You know, people are making commercial returns. We've got significant private finance coming into this market because they can see the opportunity. I think if we were in that context, some of the thornier issues, they certainly won't go away, but they would feel easier, and we can have a more constructive discussion about what should be on government, what should be on industry, in order to resolve them.
Yeah, I mean, I reflecting on some of the experiences north of the border as well. I mean, there's quite, the heat networks bill is kind of in draft form at the moment, but they talk about licensing not only for new but for existing systems as well, and that might make the industry a little bit nervous, particularly some operators who think they're probably doing okay, but it might shake up the market a little bit, just to give everybody that focus on continual performance improving. And I certainly, just going back to that point about energy efficiency, I mean, a lot of these schemes, it's not always the technology, it's just the operational kind of modes that are not sort of enabling, a better margin for the operator to actually focus more on trying to drive the heat price down. I do see, we talk about differential temperatures on networks, we talk about, pumping arrangements, we talk about, how sort of efficient a CHP runs, for example. There's lots of improvements that can be made on existing networks, and I think operators probably need a bit of a carrot and maybe a bit of a stick as well to actually improve those systems. And I hope regulation hits the right balance between carrot and stick, because a stick which is hit too hard, sorry to take the analogy too far, could actually frighten off investors a little bit, but it should be there to actually improve the landscape, the investment landscape for them. So
right. And I mean, that is, I think, in some ways our chief concern currently at the minute, is that we really strongly support regulation and have for years, in terms of customer protection, including decarbonisation. But I feel at the minute, not to say it's totally jammed tomorrow, but we are slightly in that kind of context, I think, at the minute, where we are seeing very certain short-term changes that are welcome, but we have to be honest, will add cost to the heat networks industry and their ability to, their cost to serve and their ability to invest in new heat networks, at the same time as the overarching strategy for how we build a thriving industry in the UK and how we address investment risk, which is higher in the UK than it is in other countries at the minute, are not as well developed, I think, and won't. The big risk, I think, is that even if BEIS is supportive and is trying, is working towards that, that they won't be ready on the same timescales.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, James, about trying to incentivize as well as poking them along the way. We have to try and do it in a way which is fair and just as well, but so that we get to the right outcome. And all of us look around and we want to have a better image of heat networks, and we want to be able to, grow the industry and, to benefit the world that we live in. Ultimately, that's our goal with what we're doing. But, without incentives, it's not going to happen. And without regulation, there's no reason for it to happen.
And I mean, it's very welcome that, the BEIS are currently looking, for example, at statutory undertaker rights. That's very positive as part of the broader market framework. But I think it's what is then added to that in part of an overarching strategy. Perhaps that we'll see, who knows, maybe the heat and building strategy will answer all my prayers. I don't know. But, to have a kind of a stronger strategic view of this is what we think it's going to take in terms of customer protection, in terms of how we decarbonize heat networks, in terms of what we do for charges and taxes, and how we drive the kind of risks of investment out of the market. I think that's what we really need to see as a whole.
Let's just say that's brilliant. So I think this is edging towards something I'd like to hear your thoughts on. Let's just say that we've managed the consumer confidence. They're now confident that a heat network is a fair and competitive heat source, and they're buying into that. How do we get around and you've identified, actually, Carolyn, the investment risk that exists, and the certainty that you need? This is a long-term infrastructure project, and that's why we can't just borrow everything from other playbooks, because it is unique and we're trying to catch up, and it is heavy infrastructure. There's been some interesting talk about zoning. I'd be really interested to pull that in there and just see unpick a little bit how we think that can help the situation, on the premise, as you say, that the consumer is now really excited about getting onto the heat network. But how do we give the investment industry the same sort of confidence?
Yeah, I mean, if I can, I'll start briefly, shall I? I mean, we wrote a report last year about, maybe still this year, about about zoning. It's been a weird odd year, right? I mean, maybe it's like, before COVID is when we kind of wrote it. But for us, I mean, zoning can mean a lot of different things to lots of different people, right? And very briefly, for us, what it means is that not only are you identifying areas that are where heat networks would be the most cost-effective option to help you decarbonize that area. By that, we usually mean denser areas of demand in towns and cities. But then you are also, once you have identified that that is the area that would be right for a heat network, that effectively brings into effect national and local policies that support connection and expansion of that heat network. That could be, on our side, for example, we would support an obligation to connect for non-domestic buildings that are in heat network zones. And you could also start to look at it, I think, in terms of, for example, how planning policy thinks about consenting. And that's obviously something, that Scottish Government is thinking about quite carefully. It could also, even things like where we use SAP and the kind of standards that we're meeting for dwelling level kind of build efficiency and emission standards, you could see that kind of taking a zoned approach as well. And I think if we had that, particularly for non-domestic anchor loads, it would really significantly reduce the connection risks that we face right now.
Yeah, I mean, the greatest example of that in action is in GLA, isn't it, in Greater London? And I don't think we'd have so many district heating systems built and, you know, being built at the moment if it wasn't for that sort of ambitious kind of policy that came through from GLA. I think a lot of local authorities are quite slow to develop new policy, not necessarily that so they don't want to, it just takes a lot of time and takes a lot of consultation. So if we could see sort of local policy being sort of rolled out across the UK, which had a kind of a framework and it had kind of some basic features which could be adapted in different areas, I think that would be really, really strong. And that's what they're trying to achieve in Scotland at the moment with the progression of LHEs, which Buro Happold are involved with. It's just trying to get a bit of consistency, because what you don't want to do is create a situation where maybe you're enforcing a concession on an area as well, because it's not always right to connect to a district heating system, but you know, certainly some buildings are obvious kind of contenders, and you know, you really need to reduce the investment risk, but at the same time still have a little bit of flexibility. And how you get that balance, it's probably in a different kind of sector to me a little bit in terms of policy development, but we're looking outside in, I think that's what needs to happen. Somewhere in between concessions and kind of, you know, a loose zoning kind of heat density led sort of, you know, the classic GIS map that we're all familiar with, where it shows high heat density here, this should be a district heating system, and then it's kind of left up for, you know, the market to kind of respond to that. It needs to be a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, templates are always a great thing to have, and they certainly do make things easy for people. And you know, for me, one of the key factors I think we should be encouraging is to simplify simplify the way that we do things, and simplify the way people apply for funding or zoning or whatever it may be. We need to just try and make it as easy as possible for people to firstly understand why, and like you said, using GIS maps and things like that, and highlighting areas where there is a high heat density, and showing the benefit. You know, I'm going to bring in that word now, sorry, digitalisation, by using digital products and solutions, and by actually showing people, you know, facts, figures and numbers that can improve their systems, their efficiencies, and the reasons why they should connect to heat networks. And like you said, James, it's not always appropriate, and in some scenarios it you know, feasibilities wouldn't always work out, but actually having that clear data to show people is always more beneficial. You know, we are very much based on facts, figures and visualizations, and if we've got all of that data in front of us, then it makes making those decisions far easier. It makes investment far easier when we can see that there is a reason to do that, and that there is a return on that investment. You know, apart from somebody just saying to you, you should have a heat network, or you should connect to a heat network, actually putting figures and facts and visualization behind that to prove it. For me, that's the value. That's the value of digitalization and bringing in digital solutions.
And just from a manufacturing supplier perspective, I mean, as we've talked about in the sort of, everyone knows the huge growth that the network, the industry needs to go through if it's to fulfill the role that it needs to. I mean, that from a manufacturer perspective is volume. And an interesting point was been made is that what you need is a market that's ready, a supply chain that's ready to provide high quality products that are going to do the right thing. You can't have you can't suddenly introduce a whole new bunch of products that aren't proven. What this needs to be is investment into high quality units that will deliver its long-term performance to deliver these long-term systems. From a manufacturer, do you need more confidence from the market that you're to come and bring more support into it?
So I completely agree with you. As a manufacturing company, we need to have the right solution to be able to offer into industry. You know, and there are many manufacturers out there that do have really great products, and you know, there are great scenarios where those products can be used. I think in some contexts and some situations, designs that I see at the moment, they're not necessarily using them in the right way. I can only really speak for Danfoss, I guess, in this point, is that we are a very innovative company. We have a very proactive R&D team that are always looking at the products that we've got and how they can be improved and what we can do to help work with our customers. So across Europe and in the UK, we do collaborate with as many of our customers as we can to ensure that when we're designing a new product or a new solution, that it is fitting as to what is actually required. We do loads of case studies on new products and actually show, you know, it's those facts, those figures, the visualizations to actually prove that the product works and why it should be used. I think that from a volume sale perspective, for all manufacturers, you know, whether that be a heat pump, you know, air source, ground source, you know, heat exchangers, valves, whatever it would be, pumps. I think that the manufacturers are ready for industry to move on with this, you know, and we're sitting here ready to support. But I think the only way of ensuring that the product is correct is by collaborating. You know, and for me, doing these case studies with my customers and seeing what my colleagues are doing across Europe and actually understanding that we're providing the right solution is far more valuable than the actual value of the sale itself. You know, it's more about ensuring that we're doing what's right. Danfoss currently are doing a huge project in Norberg at our head office, where we are basically doing everything that we're telling our customers to do. So we are completely decarbonising, just to prove that it works, you know. And I think that, you know, a lot of manufacturers out there have taken a very similar stance, and they are taking an opinion to do that as well. And I guess in the reverse, it's not necessarily if we're ready for industry, but industry ready to accept, you know, manufacturers in open book conversations, collaborations, and making sure that we develop the products that they need as well.
And Caroline, is that something that you would say from I suppose some of the people, some of your members who are in really the supply and sort of installation capacity? Are we ready for the large expansion?
We are definitely ready, right? Just bring it on, I think. Yes, I mean, I think, you know, there are well documented gaps in some of the skills that we'll need, you know, when we really start to expand. But the market is definitely ready. We are ready to go. We just need to get some of this stuff to fall into place, you know, to tip it into being quite, in some ways, you know, compared to the rest of the energy industry, perhaps a slightly marginal kind of profitability kind of exercise at the minute, to something that is strongly incentivized, and we can you know, put loads of private investment into making this work.
Yeah, I certainly think from a consultant perspective, there's so much potential out there, but it's a real wrangle to get the ducks in a row, as you say, to get approvals to move forward, and that's not helped by policy and the somewhat grey areas of policy. But what's great is is a little bit like you're referring to, sort of the sort of grassroots commitment to moving into the next into the future and the next systems that we need to, and actually walking the walk. And what you're finding is that if you just do things, it can be done. The real hurdle is, though, that you know, you need money to do that, and not everyone has the money available to do that at the moment. But it's certainly a really exciting time.
It really is. I think as an industry, we're always, I think, you know, especially being within the industry, I think we're always so concerned about stepping outside of that box. But only when we actually get to the point where we've stepped outside of that box and we start looking at things in a different way, will we actually start to see the change that we all want. You know, we can all walk the same road every day and nothing will change. It's when we decide to take a different path that we'll actually really start to see change. And policy is a massive driver for that for me. You know, it really does have to be behind it. You know, policy will drive the decisions to step outside of that box, but we have to also step outside of our comfort zones. You know, we're very comfortable with how we design a system and what we use, and, you know, we use the same products, or we do it in the same way, and we use the same temperatures, you know, but only when we actually take ourselves outside of that and really start to be creative can we start to see the change that we all want.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm feeling quite positive about it. I mean, maybe it's Friday, you know, but I think we have, like, I think on a, you know, if you also kind of look at it, I suppose, from Heat Network's place in the broader energy, broader energy policy and how we get to net zero, I think the fact that we have the heat and building strategy about to be published, we've got a hydrogen strategy about to be published, industrial strategy, we've got COP coming up, and I think there is a real you know, there has perhaps been too little attention, I think, within BEIS, particularly on heat, or there was at least a focus on heat, but it wasn't getting traction in the same way as some of the much larger market reforms that they did to electricity, you know, 10 years ago. I think we are in a totally different world now, where it feels so much of kind of senior government attention is focused on how we crack heat decarbonisation, and that is a great place for heat networks to be, I think, because they are clearly part of the solution. They can go first and they can go quickly, you know. So I think actually what I'm really hoping is that you know, in terms of, as you say, getting these ducks in a line, if we get all of those pieces in terms of an overarching strategy, we have clearer regulation and we have clearer incentives, and the industry is you know, responding to that, I think in a few years we could be flying, I think.
Let's hope so.
Fantastic. I did remember a quote I heard from a gentleman called Herman at the mine water scheme in Helen in the Netherlands, and he said, and I've always wanted to steal this one, but I'm not going to. But he said that a network is only valuable when you can share something, and I think that's a really important fundamental principle. And part of the problem, or the challenge, or the bump, if you like, in the road that we have at the moment is a slightly existential crisis, is that we've had this massive revenue generation from a CHP engine that can share value that those that are receiving the heat couldn't have. And we're now in a slight moment of questioning how we deliver that equivalent value that we can generate centrally to people, individual consumers down the end. But it's just more about being creative and thinking about the benefits that we can offer from flexibility that you just can't do individually, and also thinking of heat networks as a utility, as they should rightly be respected, and the complementary support that they can give to the massive challenge of electrification that will happen across our electrical networks. And so when we start to think about it in that context, the heat network can do so much to relieve power networks of capacity. And so it's a very exciting time to be there, but it does need to think very carefully about how we draw our system boundaries and project boundaries, and about which benefits we can include or can't include into that to demonstrate our case.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, the relative economics of gas-fired, you know, whether it's CHP or boilers versus decarbonised options like heat pumps, or, you know, if you're going to use biomass or EFW, etc., that is not unique to heat networks. You know, that challenge is the case, you know, across the industry. The beautiful thing, obviously, about heat networks is that once it's there, and then you solve that challenge for the broader energy industry, it'll work for heat networks, right? And I think, especially on the heat pump side, I think hopefully over the next year, that's going to be a focus, particularly for policy, in terms of starting to unwind some of the, well, things that were put in place for good reason, but are hindering now a shift from gas to electrification.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we really do need to look at the fact that, you know, we're moving now from that 4th generation to 5th generation heat networks, and the benefit of the 5th generation heat network is that you're multi-sourced with your heat generation. You know, you're not just tied to a biomass or a heat pump or a solar farm. You have the benefit of using numerous amounts of energy sources, and with smart technologies you can choose which resource you're using for your heat at any one time. So, you know, you could have an energy from waste, or you can have wind farm or solar and a biomass and a gas boiler if you needed to have a gas boiler for a backup if your network's that big. And, you know, think of all of the fantastic opportunities and renewable resources and energies that can be used to heat those networks up. And, you know, with storage tanks on a really lovely summer's day, how much energy you can store in a storage tank, which means that you don't have to burn a fossil fuel in order to heat your building for the next 2 or 3 days. And, you know, I think that's the beauty of what a heat network is for me. You know, and then going into like cooling networks, you know, we don't generally talk much about cooling networks, but going into a cooling network, it's recovering heat from supermarkets, from manufacturing plants, and using that, you know, and distributing those energies. You know, we waste so much energy in the UK and across the world, but why aren't we using it? And, you know, this is what I think 5th generation district heating offers beyond any sort of standard domestic heating system, is that you can multi-source it, you can benefit from your surrounding area, you know, to provide this efficiency that we're all so desperate to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's like parting shot to all of this as well, is that I think we're in the nuts and bolts sometimes. The way we measure the success of a project as well is in typical engineering metrics of carbon, kilowatt hours, and cost. And if you look at the socioeconomics of some of these bigger district heating schemes and look at a different set of metrics, that will help policymakers and decision makers, which, let's face it, mostly public sector local authorities at the moment. You know, that they've got a big challenge there to sort of look at, you know, a portfolio of potential development projects on their patch, if you like. And if you can talk about jobs, you can talk about training,
Exactly.
you can talk about a whole host of air quality, you name it, type benefits from that. You really start to attract you know, I guess, you know, a lot more funding potentially from public sector, which can actually be quantified in terms of its impacts, not only for carbon, which we all know is incredibly important and something we're all really passionate about, but also about, you know, the next couple of years can potentially be quite challenging in the UK. And if we talk about the green recovery, we've probably got sick of talking about it over the summer. But you know, you can't get away from the fact that big capital projects like this will have huge potential to help the economy bounce back. And
Exactly.
in the next 2-3 years.
Exactly. And the economy, you know, we need to create jobs, and we need to, you know, people need to be in employment, and, you know, these networks will require skills and skilled people, and that generates jobs, which increases the, you know, the benefit to the economy. So, you know, it's full circle, isn't it, really? You know, you start from something where we're not particularly doing it so well, we make these improvements, and from that, not only do we generate cleaner, greener energy, but we're also recovering our economy from where we are now, and building new skill sets and developing new ways of working. You know,
Exactly.
for me, it's a no-brainer. You know,
And
let's do it now.
well, yeah, exactly. Because also the lovely thing, I suppose, about decentralized energy is also that those jobs are distributed across the UK. You know, it's especially when we look at energy efficiency, we look at heat network expansions, that is for the majority focused outside of the southeast for the most part. You know, as long as you move beyond, you know, as we said, the success that London has had with heat networks, you know, you have to be in the place doing it, putting the pipes in the ground, which I think is also a really important part of this.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So we've discussed, and I think we all agree on the benefits of regulation. I think it needs to happen. And actually, what was interesting, coming back to where we started, it needs to touch the consumer. It needs to touch the technical installation, so that everybody is clear on which way they're pushing to deliver the best product. And we've also discussed the bright future and the benefits that we can extract from this wonderful technology. I'm gonna finish off there with, if we had one wish change for that we could implement in terms of regulation, what would it be? And I'm going to start. And mine would be just that there was a better consideration